It is actually so hot in here, but On Her Majesty's Secret Service is a Christmas movie, so I have to look the part, right? Welcome back if you've been here before, and welcome if you haven't. This is part 2 of a series I'm doing where I am doing a deep dive of every James Bond movie in chronological order. I'm splitting up the videos by actor just to make it a little bit easier, more digestible. But this is an interesting occurrence because as of when this video comes out, the Sean Connery video will be finished and uploaded, but I haven't seen Diamonds Are Forever yet because actually before Sean Connery did his last Bond movie, George Lazenby made a James Bond movie, and it is called On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Unfortunately, Mr. Lazenby was not invited back to play Mr. Bond again because, according to what I read, he was a fucking nightmare to work with. So, you know, they couldn't deal with a diva, and he was out. But we do have one movie where he dons the suit and does all the 007 things, and today we are here to analyze it. So, let's go. This movie tends to have a reputation as like the worst James Bond movie, maybe. I think a lot of people attribute it to the fact that, of course, it's the worst when they only had the guy come in once to play James and then never had him back again. But I don't think it's purely because he was like so terrible or the movie was so horrible or something. Like I said, I think a large part of it, at least according to Albert Broccoli, he was just a nightmare to work with. So it's not so much a statement on the quality of his work, but more the quality of his personal character. But that doesn't matter because he is not George Lazenby in the movie. He is Bond, James Bond, 007. And this was a very interesting watch. I did have low expectations going in just because it's the way people generally talk about this one. But I actually have a professor that loves James Bond, and he was telling me that he appreciates this one more than most. So I did go in with an open mind, and I have to say I was pretty impressed in some regards. So let's just get right into it. If you don't remember, or you haven't seen my first Bond deep dive video on the Sean Connery movies, I have formulated my own rating system for these films. Each of these I rank out of 10. I start with the plot, and that gets double weighted in the movie's total score. Then I talk about the intro, the opening credits with the music and the iconic graphics that they include in every single Bond movie. And then we talk about the Bond girls, the way the movie treats women. Then we talk about the villains. And finally we end with the gadgets, which gets weighted half as much. And all the other categories besides the plot get weighted just once. And then I total them all up according to my formula to see what score it spits out so that we can compare them afterwards, talk about them, look at them next to each other, and just analyze it more than we probably need to. So let's begin with the plot. This movie opens in a very interesting way, as Bond movies tend to do, but this one was a little more confusing than usual, just as far as figuring out what is going on. It begins with a woman walking into the ocean, intending on not returning, and James, runs up and saves her and carries her away, but then James gets beat up and the woman escapes, and he looks at the camera and says, "This never happened to the other guy," and that's it. So then we see 007 at a casino, like he loves to be at. We see this woman again. They interact a little bit. They sleep together. And after that, James ends up getting captured by who is this woman's father. The man apologizes, says that he's actually a friend, sorry for kidnapping you. And he asks James to please marry his daughter because her name is Tracy, and she's the main Bond girl of the film. And he says, please marry Tracy. She wants to die so bad. And he says, I need you to make love to her so good that she starts to love you and has a reason to live. which is insane. And James thinks so as well, to be fair. He says, I can't be doing that. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not qualified to be offering that sort of help. So then this man, I believe his name is Draco. I'm going to say Draco. He informs James that if he marries his daughter Tracy, Draco will give him information on Blofeld, who James has been trying and failing to find for the past 2 years since he got away in You Only Live Twice. So then James agrees. Tracy is resistant. Of course, she doesn't like being just married off to someone, and as if she's a basket case who needs help. But, then they start spending some time together, and there's a truly beautiful montage of the dates they're going on and the time they're spending together, and they start to fall in love with each other. The time comes for James to go to Switzerland to find Blofeld, and Tracy is talking to her father, and there's a pretty powerful moment where she is talking about being in love with James, and her father says something like, James is in love with you? And she says, not yet. So it's a really interesting dynamic, and something that I think is fascinating to explore. What happens when somebody falls deeply in love with 007, notoriously not a monogamous person? And of course, plenty of women fall in love with him, but this is on a level that is more serious than we're used to. So it is interesting to see, but that plotline gets shelved for a little bit. James goes to Switzerland to try to get to business, find the leader of Spectre, and see what he's up to and bring him to justice. Okay, I am going to focus on what I like, because there was a lot that I enjoyed about this movie, but it'd be remiss of me if I didn't mention that about the first hour, which is a long time in a movie, that James is in Switzerland, it is really slow. And I did get a bit bored. It was interesting enough. Of course, I was watching, I was doing my best to stay engaged, but it did start to drag a little bit in the middle. But then the last 40 minutes, I'd say, of the movie were really, really strong. So we'll get to that, but I'll just talk about what I liked. Switzerland is beautiful. My mom is from Germany. I've been lucky enough to visit over there. It is one of the most beautiful places in the world, and the movie does a tremendous job of representing that. The set design is incredible, as always. I always love the sets in Bond movies. James is undercover as a count, and he is wearing, at one point, this gay little kilt, and it is so adorable. I was laughing my head off when he walked out with it. I was like, is this why people didn't like George Lazenby? Like, maybe he emasculated James Bond, but I thought he looked sexy, to be frank. And I'm not the only one that perceives him as gay in this moment, because James meets all of the women at this retreat, which is really just Blofeld's secret base. And one of the women says something to him like, you don't seem like you're into women. And James says, usually I'm not, but here I am. And I was like, okay, bisexual James, more likely than you think. But then James gets caught, and a really, really exciting action sequence that lasts for the rest of the movie ensues, where James escapes the base to try to get to somewhere where he can contact London and say, Blofeld is here, come get him. And he skis down this hill with all of these people following him. He loses one of his skis and skis down the hill on one ski. It is tremendously thrilling. Skiing terrifies me, in spite of the fact I live in Utah, which is one of the skiing capitals of the world. I won't do it. It terrifies me to no end, and it isn't any different on screen. I was watching with bated breath, especially because one of the skiers pursuing James falls off of a cliffside, and he falls for much, much longer than I am comfortable with. But James gets back down to town. He runs into Tracy and they're reunited. She takes him on this incredible car chase. And then they get away from the action and find an abandoned barn to spend the night in. It's not abandoned, there are animals in it, but the owner isn't anywhere to be seen. And they are laying in the hay together and talking. And I'll talk about this more with the Bond girls, I think, but James has had sex with like 2 or 3 different women that aren't Tracy. Just in the like literal like 2 days he's been away on this mission. But in spite of that, they have a really vulnerable conversation where he talks about not knowing, you know, how to be who he is in a committed relationship, which is interesting to see him talk about candidly. But then it comes around and he sort of accepts the fact that Tracy is something really, really special, and he doesn't know when he'll find someone like her again, if he will. So he tells her, I'm willing to give all of this up, and I want to marry you, even if that means not being 007 anymore. And she says yes, and, you know, she's been in love with him this whole time. You can see in the way that she looks at him. And finally, this is the moment where he reciprocates that, and it's really tender. It got me. I really, really appreciated that aspect of the plot. But then, the next morning, the bad guys catch up to them, and they ski away once again, and it is fucking gorgeous. I'm telling you, the cinematography of them on this mountain in the Alps is just breathtaking. Blofeld uses some sort of device that explodes to start an avalanche. Truly, words cannot do justice for how jaw-droppingly terrifying this sequence is. The avalanche looks real. I'm convinced they actually started a real avalanche for this movie. I don't know, but I was convinced. And it was crazy. It was incomprehensibly large and looming and scary, and they barely get away. Tracy gets captured, James barely escapes, and James goes back to London without Tracy, and she is in Blofeld's custody. So then James and MI6 and Tracy's dad plan an assault on Blofeld's base to blow it sky high. That sequence is really, really thrilling. There's guns blazing and explosions, and it's very exciting. By the way, this movie is really gory, especially compared to the previous movies, which had barely any blood at all. At one point in the ski chase, one of the bad guys gets shredded into a snowblower, like a really big industrial snowblower, and his guts get sprayed out the top with the snow. It's insane, and that's not the only example of really like cringy, violent moments in this movie, but I liked it. It was great. James is able to free Tracy. Blofeld is getting away. He chases him down this like skeleton luge, I think is what you would call it. The most I know about skeleton is from watching the Winter Olympics because it's my favorite sport. So at the end of the skeleton chase, Blofeld hits a tree by the neck, presumably dies because James just leaves, and it doesn't seem like he could survive something like that. And that is it. The end of the conflict comes kind of suddenly, and then it's just like, okay, time for the wedding, but, you know, it's fine by me. The wedding is truly, truly beautiful. The acting is gorgeous. It's a very impactful moment. It breaks my heart a little bit to see Moneypenny there at the wedding, who I adore beyond belief. Just crying, you know, seeing her beloved James getting married, but she is, you know, you can tell that she's happy for him, and it's always sort of been a joke that they're for each other, but it's still an inevitably painful moment for her, at least a little bit. But they drive off after their absolutely beautiful wedding, and you're just glowing with happiness like the two characters are. And then Blofeld pulls up in a car and shoots at James and Tracy and Tracy dies. I mean, this is one of the most talked about moments in any Bond movie because it's really powerful. James fully breaks down. He's cradling her. A policeman comes up and, says, like, is everything all right? And James is just sobbing and saying, it's okay. She's just resting. She's just sleeping. And then the movie ends. And it leaves you hollow. Truly, I sat there for a few minutes after the movie just emotionally processing what happens, and it was really, really well acted, well executed. I was really, really impressed with how this movie wrapped up, even though it was unbelievably tragic. So, even though I focused on the positive stuff, like I said, there were a few moments in this movie where it dragged, and there are a couple of, like, cringy things that I think I'll get into more in these other categories, just small failings of the plot. But as you can tell, the last chunk of this movie is really, really strong, and I have to give credit to the most emotionally impactful moment we've had in the series so far. It has really stayed with me. It was beautifully, beautifully executed. So, in spite of its shortcomings, I feel good about giving On Her Majesty's Secret Service a plot rating of 8 out of 10. Okay, we gotta let go of all that heaviness. I might have to take this hat off because it is so hot in here. Next is now I want it because I can feel how sweaty my hair is. Oh my god. Okay, the next category is the intro. And this is the part that hurts me a little bit because this intro was not good. It was primarily a montage of all of the previous movies, excluding James. Like, they wouldn't show Sean Connery, but they showed, like, previous villains and previous Bond girls in, like, windows that were cut in the shape of a martini glass. But there was no beautiful song playing. Even, like, the theme song they were playing wasn't, like, the best Bond theme song. It was really just a generic, like, spy music number. And it was quite short. It was pretty boring. It was very lame. And at points it was honestly ugly. Like, the colors were not even pretty. So, as much as I want to, like, redeem this movie from the reputation it has, the intro sucked. And it gets a 1 out of 10 from me. Watch it if you don't believe me. There's really nothing that redeems it, I think. Okay, the Bond girls. This is another complicated category, I think. Let me start with what I think is not so good. It's definitely dubious that, a driving plot point of the movie is Tracy's dad begging James to marry her because that will make her not be suicidal anymore. And it's a very, like, savory type thing. But I don't fault the movie too much for that because truly Tracy is resistant to that, and so is James, to be fair. And when they do fall in love, it feels like it's against the odds and it's not related to that scheme at all. So even though Tracy's dad gets what he wants, it doesn't end up feeling questionable at all, really. The love they have for each other feels very true and very genuine. So I don't really fault the movie too much for that, but it's worth noting. I mean, especially because if Tracy just, like, relented to that immediately, then it would feel questionable. But she actually, has, like, her own desires and her own wills that conflict with that of her father. So it ends up being a pretty empowering arc, to be honest. Okay, back to some questionable stuff. At Blofeld's base, there is this group of women who are being hypnotized by Blofeld, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. But beyond the hypnosis, every single one of them, first of all, they're all, like, a different race, which is relevant to Blofeld's scheme, because the idea is he's going to hypnotize these women and then deploy them all over the world to spread the virus that he's created. But these women are not named. They're credited all in the credits as the Jewish one, the Nigerian one, and stuff like that. So they're not really fleshed out, and they're all represented as being extremely ditzy. Although I adore the love story that ends up coming to fruition, James cheats on Tracy multiple times and doesn't seem to feel any remorse about it. She doesn't seem to care. I don't even know if she finds out, and maybe they're just chill like that. Maybe they're more poly than we think. But it's a little bit unsettling that even though James isn't in love with her yet, he doesn't feel an ounce of remorse about sleeping with other people, and then not a day later is he proposing to Tracy. So it just seems kind of like a bizarre thing for him to be going through that isn't explored as much as I would like, but like I said, it is addressed a little bit. But in spite of the shortcomings, this is sort of the theme with this movie, in spite of the shortcomings, it does some really good things. And I think that it would honestly get a perfect score from me were it not for those little questionable representations of women as being dumb or thoughtless or just completely lacking any sort of agency of their own. And yes, they are hypnotized, and that's the point, but even before they're hypnotized, they lack any sort of agency, it seems. So in spite of that, this movie gives us the most profoundly moving engagement with women that we've had in any of the films so far. We get to see James and Tracy fall deeply in love with each other and complement each other in really beautiful ways. And, Bond girls have died before, but this one just doesn't compare to the other ones. And from emotional impact alone, I think that demonstrates something this movie does really, really well. Tracy is an incredible character. She's strong. She's badass. She's very, very charming. She has a wonderful sense of humor. And she is a fully fleshed out and deep character. And probably my favorite Bond girl we've had so far. And I don't know, she really won me over, and the way the movie engages with her and her relationship with James was just really impressive to me. So I don't think I could give the movie a perfect 10 out of 10 or anything, because there are a couple of questionable things, but I did give it a 9 out of 10. And I think Tracy deserves that. It's really good stuff. She's the best thing about this movie. So 9 out of 10. Okay, the villains, like I've already mentioned multiple times. The main villain of this film, like the last one, is Ernst Stavro Blofeld. Oh, I love saying that. He is recast from the last movie, and I have to say, I like the way the last Blofeld looks a little bit more. I think the scar through the eye is very iconic. But I really liked this actor. He did a wonderful job. The whole hypnosis, mind control, bacteriological warfare, which is really more like viral warfare in the end, is a very interesting scheme, very scary, very cool, typical Spectre stuff. He has a very creepy and self-satisfied, smug demeanor that is a pleasure to see on screen. I think he's a really great villain. I have to mention, he tries to seduce Tracy, which I take umbrage with, because like I said in the Connery video, if you haven't seen it, Blofeld is so gay, I can't even believe it. If you don't believe me, watch You Only Live Twice. That that as a gay man, I know it when I see it. He can be bisexual, that's all right. So he was a pretty strong villain overall. I think we could have explored his motives a little bit more. I know I keep saying that in like every movie, but a villain is more interesting when it kind of makes sense that they are the way that they are. And I know that's a complicated conversation. Does every villain need to have a tortured background and a reason for them being evil? Can't people just be evil? And that's interesting. Maybe, but I don't know. I like nuance. So I gave the villain in this movie a 7 out of 10. Very good. By no means, groundbreaking or completely new. I liked him more than in the last movie. I thought he was more interesting and had more of a presence than the previous actor who played Blofeld, but yeah, 7 out of 10. Feels just right to me. And then the gadgets in this movie. There weren't any, which is lame. I mean, like, you could make an argument like, oh, he cracked a safe once, and that doesn't count. He doesn't meet with Q. He doesn't get all of his cool stuff. I mean, I already told you how amazing the action sequences are in this movie, but, he barely even uses a gun in this movie, let alone any sort of cool, interesting gadgets. The person who has the most gadgets is Blofeld, and he uses it to start the avalanche, which is pretty incredible. Does the movie get credit for that? I don't think so. That doesn't count. So, gadgets, 1 out of 10. I don't know what else to say. There's nothing there. It's really a shame. So, if we total up all of those scores and calculate an average according to how I'm weighting them, On Her Majesty's Secret Service gets a total 6.09 out of 10 from me. Which, interestingly, feels appropriate to me. I know I gave it such glowing reviews with the Bond girls and the plot, but really, my plot score was so strongly redeemed because of James's relationship with Tracy, which is the strongest part of the movie. But besides that, there's not really that much going on. It's not the most fascinating villain scheme in the world or villain that we've had. So, I guess 6.09 seems low, but it feels overall accurate to me. It's better than Thunderball, so that's definitely true, but I don't know if I would say that this movie as a whole is better than any of the other Connery films. I haven't seen Diamonds Are Forever yet, so I guess I shouldn't even be comparing him to Connery. So that feels like an appropriate score, but, I'm glad that I can be on the record by saying I think this movie is probably overhated. At least if I'm understanding the discourse around it correctly. People tend to talk about this movie like it's like the worst Bond thing to ever happen, and it shouldn't even be included in the chronology, and it's on the same level as Never Say Never Again. But I don't know. It made me feel things in a very real way. It made me feel excited and thrilled. It had me on the edge of my seat. I was glued to the screen the last hour of the movie. And I could have cried at the very end. I think if I wasn't medicated, I probably would have. So, George Lazenby, you might have only gotten one film. You may lack a level of charisma that all of the other Bond actors have. But I think this one is worth a watch, for sure. So, I'm glad that I got to cover it. It's getting its own entire video, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Like I said, I haven't seen the last Connery one yet, but weird YouTube time travel stuff, the Connery video is already out, so go watch it if you're interested in a deep dive analysis of all of the Sean Connery James Bond movies, except Never Say Never Again, because nobody cares about that one. This should be the only weird interruption in the chronology as far as actors go. The next deep dive video will be on all of the Roger Moore Bond films, which I am so excited to watch. And I hope you guys stick around. Comment on the video, subscribe, like this. I don't know. It's easier to do this if I know that people are seeing it and enjoying it on some level. So, let me know if you did. But other than that, I am so excited to see you next time with Roger Moore. See you then.